December 7th, 1941, the date Admiral Takashita had circled in red ink months before arrived, with the roar of Mitsubishi engines screaming toward Pearl Harbor. Ooh! From his cramped cabin aboard the battleship Nagato, anchored in Hiroshima Bay, Takashita listened to radio reports filtering through static. American battleships burning, Arizona sinking, Oklahoma capsizing. The operation he'd helped Vice Admiral Kiichi Nagumo plan from smoke-filled conference rooms in Tokyo had exceeded even their most optimistic projections. Yet as junior officers celebrated in the corridors outside, pounding bulkheads with jubilant fists, Takashita sat motionless at his writing desk, fountain pen hovering above blank paper. His hand trembled not from age, though at 57 his hair had silvered, but from a certainty that chilled his blood despite the December warmth trapped below decks. He'd seen America. Not the mythical demon nation described in propaganda posters plastered across Tokyo's Ginza district, but the real America. In 1938, before tensions escalated beyond diplomatic repair, Takashita had served as naval attaché in Washington, spending 18 months observing what Japanese intelligence deemed critical. American naval capabilities, coastal defenses, Pacific Fleet movements. But what haunted him now wasn't the battleships moored at San Diego or the destroyers being fitted in Philadelphia's shipyards. It was the drive from Washington to Pittsburgh 6 hours through Pennsylvania countryside, where he'd witnessed something that military planners in Tokyo refused to comprehend. The factories, endless, impossibly vast factories. Steel mills that glowed orange against twilight skies. Their furnaces consuming trainloads of iron ore that arrived every 40 minutes. Automobile plants in Detroit where he'd watch courtesy of a Ford Motor. Company tour arranged by the State Department to complete vehicle rolling off assembly lines every 61 seconds. Not 61 minutes, 61 seconds. Takashita had requested to see the production line 3 times, certain his translator had made an error. The American guide, a cheerful man named Roberts, who chewed gum incessantly, had laughed at his astonishment. "Admiral, this is just one plant. We've got 47 more making Fords, and that's not counting Chevrolet, Chrysler, Packard, ... According to records from the American Automobile Manufacturers Association documents, Takashita had meticulously copied into his attached reports the United States produced 4.6 million automobiles in 1938 alone. Japan's entire output that year barely exceeded 20,000 units. The mathematical disparity wasn't just striking, it was apocalyptic. Each automobile factory represented machine tools, trained workers, assembly processes, and industrial infrastructure that could pivot toward war production. Takashita had warned the Naval General Staff in Tokyo, "Gentlemen, they are not building cars. They are demonstrating capacity to build 10,000 aircraft monthly, if provoked." His warnings had been filed away, dismissed by officers who'd never left Japan's shores. Men who believed spirit and samurai tradition would overcome material disadvantage. Admiral Osami Nagano, chief of the Naval General Staff, had actually said during one planning session, "The American soldier is soft, raised on luxury. He won't endure sacrifice." Takashita had remained silent during that meeting, remembering Depression-era Americans he'd met in Washington steelworkers, who'd lost jobs, but kept showing up at union halls, seeking work, farmers in Oklahoma, rebuilding after dust storms destroyed everything they owned. Now, listening to reports of burning American ships, Takashita finally put pen to paper, beginning the journal entry that would consume him for the next 3 years. January 15th, 1942, Takashita opened his leather-bound Junola gift from his wife. Keiko, before his deployment hand, reread the entry he'd written 5 weeks earlier, the night after Pearl Harbor. "We have awakened a sleeping dragon and filled him with terrible resolve." He'd borrowed shamelessly from Admiral Isoroku, Yamamoto's more famous quote, though Takashita suspected Yamamoto had never actually said those exact words. What mattered wasn't the quote's authenticity, but its accuracy. The euphoria that gripped Tokyo following Pearl Harbor had intensified through December and into the new year. Japanese forces captured Wake Island on December 23rd. Hong Kong fell on Christmas Day. Manila became Japanese-occupied territory by January 2, 1942. Newspapers across Japan printed maps showing the expanding empire circles of influence spreading across the Pacific like ink drops on rice paper. Emperor Hirohito himself had issued a rescript praising the military's achievements. In Ginza, citizens celebrated with lantern parades. Schoolchildren learned songs about conquering the decadent West. Takashita saw only catastrophe approaching. From his desk in the Naval Staff College, where he'd been assigned after requesting transfer from active fleet duty, requests that raised eyebrows among his superiors, he compiled data that painted a picture directly opposite from official celebrations. His access to intelligence reports gave him information unavailable to the public and unwelcome among leadership. American industrial mobilization wasn't just beginning, it was accelerating at speeds that defied Japanese planning assumptions. He'd obtained through naval intelligence channels a copy of President Franklin Roosevelt's January 6th message to Congress. Roosevelt had announced production targets that Takashita initially assumed were typographical errors. 60,000 aircraft in 1942, 125,000 in 1943, 45,000 tanks in 1942, 8 million tons of shipping. The numbers seemed fantastic, impossible, the desperate boasting of a wounded nation. But Takashita remembered those automobile factories, those steel mills glowing in Pennsylvania darkness. He remembered Roberts the tour guide's casual mention of 47 more plants. He spent 3 weeks requesting additional intelligence data from contacts in the Naval General Staff. Lieutenant Commander Yoshiro Fujimura, an old academy friend who worked in the intelligence section, smuggled him documents that should have been restricted, intercepted American industrial surveys, decoded State Department cables, reconnaissance photographs of American shipyards. According to a report from the Office of Production Management, the American agency coordinating war production companies like General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler were converting automobile plants to military production. General Motors production chief William Knutson, previously in charge of civilian car manufacturing, now directed the conversion of facilities capable of producing 8,000 vehicles daily into factories for aircraft engines, tank bodies, and artillery shells. Yoshi Takashita asked Fujimura over sake one evening in February. Speaking quietly in a tea house near the Sumida River, "Have you shown these reports to Nagano or Yamamoto?" Fujimura stared into his cup. "They don't want to see them. 2 weeks ago, I presented analysis showing American shipyard capacity could produce 500 merchant vessels annually once fully mobilized. Nagano told me I was defeatist." He actually used that word, defeatist, as if acknowledging enemy capabilities equals surrender. Takashita understood the institutional blindness. Japan's entire strategic planning rested on a premise that now seemed absurd, that a quick series of victories would demoralize America, leading to negotiated peace where Japan retained territorial gains. The strategy assumed America lacked will, lacked stomach for prolonged conflict, lacked the industrial base to project power across the Pacific. All three assumptions were catastrophically wrong. April 18th, 1942. The date shattered whatever complacency remained in Tokyo's military circles. American B-105 bombers launched impossibly from the aircraft carrier Hornet. A feat Japanese planners had deemed technically unfeasible struck Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe. The Doolittle raid, as Americans would call it, caused minimal physical damage. Psychologically, it devastated Japanese leadership. The sacred home islands, promised inviolable by military propagandists, had been bombed. Citizens who'd mocked American weakness now hid in shelters. Emperor Hirohito himself reportedly expressed concern about his safety. Takashita found no satisfaction in being proven correct. He sat in the Naval Staff College library, a room lined with maritime histories and strategic texts, calculating figures that made his earlier warnings seem optimistic. Recent intelligence indicated American production had surpassed even Roosevelt's ambitious targets. According to intercepted reports from the American War Production Board, information confirmed by multiple independent sources, including neutral Swedish journalists, American factories were now producing aircraft at rates approaching 6,000 monthly, not annually. Monthly. He compared this to Japanese production. In March 1942, Japan's entire aviation industry produced approximately 400 aircraft. The mathematical disparity created a ratio of 15:1. But raw numbers understated the catastrophe because American production was accelerating while Japanese production remained essentially static. Japan lacked the machine tools, the aluminum, the trained workers, and most critically, the industrial infrastructure to expand meaningfully. Commander Mitsuo Fukita, who'd led the Pearl Harbor attack air group, visited Takeshita in late April, seeking his perspective. Fushida had achieved celebrity status following. Pearl Harbor newspapers called him the man who struck the first blow, but the Doolittle raid had shaken him. "It's Takashi Tucson," Fukita said, sitting across from him in the library. "They're saying the bombers came from a secret base in China. But you don't believe that, do you?" "They came from a carrier," Takeshita replied, pushing a maritime chart across the table. "Launched approximately 600 miles east of Japan. We assumed carrier-based bombers lacked the range for such operations. We assumed incorrectly." He paused, studying Fuchida's face. "Mitsuo, may I speak frankly? You're a hero now. They won't dismiss you as defeatist." Fukita nodded slowly. "We're going to lose this war. Not possibly lose. Not likely lose. We are going to lose with mathematical certainty unless we negotiate peace immediately. And even immediate peace may come too late." Fukita stared at him. "Takashi-san, we've won every engagement. The Americans are retreating across the Pacific, retreating while their factories produce aircraft faster, and we can shoot them down." Takeshita pulled out his notebook, filled with calculations. "Look at these figures. American industrial capacity exceeds ours by a factor of approximately 17-1 in steel production, 10-1 in coal, and 7-1 in petroleum. These aren't estimates. These are pre-war statistics from the League of Nations industrial surveys. According to the League of Nations 1939 industrial production index, the last comprehensive survey before war disrupted international reporting, the United States produced 61 million tons of steel that year. Japan produced 6 million tons. America pumped 180 million barrels of oil annually from domestic wells. Japan produced essentially zero petroleum domestically, relying entirely on imports and occupied territories. The Dutch East Indies oil fields, recently captured, supplied only a fraction of wartime needs. June 5, 1942. Takeshita received the preliminary reports from Midway via emergency cable. The characters transmitted by telegraph operators whose hands likely trembled as they tapped out devastating news. For Japanese aircraft carriers, Kagikaga, Soryu, and Haryu sunk, or sinking, a core of Japan's naval aviation capability, the elite force that struck Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier, destroyed in a single afternoon by American dive bombers. He walked through Tokyo's streets that evening, past citizens who didn't yet know the extent of their nation's catastrophe. Newspapers would downplay the disaster, reporting a tactical setback rather than strategic annihilation. But Takeshita understood Midway's implications with clarity that made his chest tighten. Japan had entered the war with 10 aircraft carriers. America had 7 in the Pacific theater. But America's shipyards were launching new carriers while Japan's construction programs moved glacially forward. He'd obtained intelligence reports about American shipyard expansion through Fujimura, who now operated as an unofficial conduit for information that mainstream naval planning ignored. The United States had begun constructing a new class of carrier Essex-class vessels displacing 27,000 tons, capable of operating 90 aircraft. The first USS Essex itself would launch in July. Its sister ships were already under construction in yards across America. Yorktown II, Intrepid, Hornet II, Franklin, Ticonderoga, Randolph, Lexington II, Bunker Hill, Wasp II, Hancock, Bennington, Boxer. Fujimura had delivered a document that Takeshita initially dismissed as American propaganda, a U.S. Navy construction schedule projecting 24 Essex-class carriers by 1945, 24 fleet carriers, each more capable than Japan's best designs. And this didn't include the smaller escort carriers being mass-produced using merchant ship Holzkaiser. Shipbuilding in Richmond, California was reportedly launching these simplified carriers every few months using assembly techniques adapted from Henry Kaiser's automobile industry experience. It's industrialized warfare. Takeshita explained to a small group of officers he'd begun meeting with privately men who shared his concerns but feared speaking openly. They gathered in a private room at a restaurant in Shinjuku, speaking in low tones. The Americans have applied automobile production methods to military manufacturing. They're building carriers the way Ford builds car standardized designs, interchangeable parts, assembly line processes. Captain Tamachi Hara, a destroyer commander with extensive combat experience, shook his head in disbelief. Takashita-san, you're describing something impossible. Carriers require specialized construction. They've made it possible. Takashita spread intelligence photographs across the table, grainy images taken by a Japanese agent in California before his arrest. The photographs showed Kaiser's Richmond shipyard, massive cranes, assembly slips, prefabricated sections being moved into position. Look at these dates. Its escort carrier Casablanca was laid down on November 3, 1942. Launched January 5, 1943. Commissioned April 8, 1943. From nothing to operational carrier in 5 months? The silence around the table reflected stunned comprehension. Japan's carrier construction required 2 to 3 years minimum. America was launching carriers faster than Japan could train replacement pilots for those lost at Midway. Lieutenant Commander Fujimura added grimly, and there's worse news. The Americans are implementing a pilot training program that graduates 6,000 new aviators every 2 months. Our entire pilot training system graduates approximately 1,500 annually. November 12, 1942. Takashita marked the 1-year anniversary of his earliest warnings by reviewing intelligence that confirmed his worst predictions. American war production had exceeded even Roosevelt's ambitious projections. According to decoded cables from the American War, production board information verified through multiple intelligence sources, including reports from neutral diplomats in Washington, United States factories, had produced 47,000 aircraft in 1942, not the 60,000 Roosevelt projected, but close enough to demonstrate capability. Japan's production that same year totaled approximately 8,800 aircraft. The ratio had grown from 15:1 to more than 5:1 and was widening monthly. But these raw numbers obscured an even more critical disparity: aircraft quality and capability. American designs were evolving rapidly. The P-38 Lightning, P-47 Thunderbolt, and F-6F Hellcat represented technological advancements that matched or exceeded Japan's best fighters. The B-29 Superfortress intelligence reports described a pressurized high-altitude bomber with range sufficient to strike Japan from distant bases was reportedly entering production. Takashita had compiled a comprehensive analysis. 300 pages of data, charts, and projections that he formally submitted to the Naval General Staff in October. The report's conclusion was unambiguous. Continuation of hostilities ensures complete military defeat. American industrial capacity renders Japanese victory impossible, regardless of tactical brilliance or strategic innovation. Recommend immediate pursuit of negotiated settlement, accepting territorial losses. The report disappeared into bureaucratic channels. Takashita received no acknowledgement, no rebuttal, no response whatsoever. It was as if he'd submitted blank pages. Meanwhile, Japanese forces fought desperately on Guadalcanal, an island few Japanese citizens could locate on a map, but which had consumed thousands of lives since August. The American Marines holding Henderson Field were supplied by a logistics system that Takashita now recognized as unstoppable. Every week, American cargo ships delivered tons of ammunition, food, medical supplies, and replacement equipment. Japanese supply convoys, by contrast, were intercepted and destroyed with increasing frequency. He met with Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome in December, a senior officer willing to discuss uncomfortable realities. They walked through Hibiya Park, breath visible in cold air, speaking quietly to avoid being overheard. Fukudome-san, Takashita said, "Have you reviewed American merchant ship construction?" Fukudome nodded grimly. "Kaiser shipyards are launching Liberty ships faster than our submarines can sink them. It's mathematically futile." The Liberty ship program represented everything Takashita had warned about. These mass-produced cargo vessels, 10,000-ton capacity, powered by simple reciprocating engines, were being constructed using prefabrication techniques borrowed from industrial manufacturing. According to intelligence reports, American shipyards had reduced construction time from 244 days to 42 days per vessel. Henry Kaiser's Richmond Yard had launched one Liberty ship, the Robert E. Peary, in 4 days, 15 hours of publicity stunt, demonstrating capability rather than standard practice, but stunning nonetheless. "They launched 3 Liberty ships yesterday," Fukudome continued. 3 in 1 day. "Our entire merchant fleet lost 15 vessels to American submarines last month. They're building ships 3 times faster than we're losing them, while we're losing ships faster than we can replace them." March 17, 1943. Takashita received transfer orders reassigning him to Rabaul, the Japanese stronghold in New Britain. The orders came without explanation, but he understood their meaning. His persistent pessimism, his unrelenting warnings, his detailed reports documenting inevitable defeat had made him unwelcome in Tokyo. The Naval General Staff preferred optimists who promised victory through spirit and sacrifice. Takashita's mathematical certainties disturbed morale. Before departing, he spent a final evening with Fujimura at the same Shinjuku restaurant where they'd met previously. His friend looked exhausted, face drawn from months of watching accurate intelligence reports being ignored. "They're planning a massive offensive," Fujimura whispered. "Operation Igo. Admiral Yamamoto believes concentrated air attacks can disrupt American operations in the Solomons." Takashita felt weary beyond his years. Mitsuo planned Pearl Harbor to give us 6 months of freedom to consolidate the Pacific. Those 6 months passed a year ago. Every day we continue fighting, the American advantage grows. In 6 more months, their advantage will be insurmountable. In 12 months, catastrophic. Some officers believe Germany will win in Europe, forcing America to sue for peace in the Pacific. Takashita shook his head. Germany is fighting the Soviet Union, whose industrial capacity rivals America's and whose population exceeds Germany's threefold. Germany cannot win. America cannot lose. These are mathematical facts, not defeatist opinions. He flew to Rabaul in April aboard a Mitsubishi G4M bomber, arriving at a base that represented Japan's southernmost defensive perimeter. Rabaul's airfields housed hundreds of aircraft, but Takashita noticed immediately the maintenance problems. Aircraft with patched fuselages, engines overdue for replacement, pilots who looked barely old enough to shave. American air raids struck the base nightly with increasing frequency. Anti-aircraft crews fired thousands of rounds at bomber formations that seemed to grow larger each week. On April 18th, exactly 1 year after the Doolittle raid, Takashita learned that Admiral Yamamoto had been killed when American P-38 fighters intercepted his transport aircraft over Bougainville. American intelligence had decoded Japanese transmission schedules, providing Yamamoto's exact flight path to waiting fighters. The architect of Pearl Harbor, Japan's most brilliant naval strategist, was dead. Takashita wrote in his journal that evening, "Yamamoto's death symbolizes our larger defeat. The Americans decoded our messages, positioned fighters precisely, and executed the operation flawlessly. This demonstrates not just tactical capability, but systemic superiority. They possess better intelligence, better logistics, better everything. We are samurai with swords facing an opponent with machine guns." He began compiling what he privately termed his final assessment, a comprehensive analysis intended not for the Naval General Staff, who wouldn't read it, but for history. Working by candlelight in his quarters, he documented the industrial disparities with numbing precision. American steel production, in 1942, 86 million tons. Japanese production, 8 million tons. American aluminum production, 838,000 tons. Japanese production, 150,000 tons. American shipbuilding, 8 million tons of new merchant shipping. Japanese shipbuilding, 600,000 tons. August 9th, 1943. Allied forces landed on Vella La Vella, bypassing Japanese strongpoints in a strategy Takashita recognized as devastatingly efficient. American commanders weren't attacking Japanese-held islands anymore. They were simply bypassing them, letting Japanese garrisons wither from supply shortages while American forces advanced toward targets actually threatening Japanese home islands. It was industrial warfare applied strategically. Why waste resources capturing every island when you could isolate them and move forward? Takashita's role at Rabaul had become primarily administrative. At 59, he was considered too valuable for combat operations, but too troublesome for high-level planning. He'd been assigned to logistics coordination, tracking supplies that never arrived, and reinforcements that never materialized. The work gave him access to shipping manifests, supply requests, damage reports that painted an increasingly desperate picture. He spent evenings expanding his assessment, writing by candlelight because generator fuel was too scarce to waste on electric lighting. His Cortazal wooden structure, barely protecting against tropical rain, contained a small desk, sleeping mat, and 3 leather-bound journals now filled with his precise handwriting. He documented everything: production figures, casualty reports, supply shortages, tactical defeats disguised as strategic withdrawals. September 20th, 1943, he wrote, received intelligence summary indicating American production of all military aircraft exceeded 9,000 units last month. Japan produced approximately 700 aircraft. The ratio is now 30-1. More critically, American pilot training programs are graduating 10,000 pilots every 2 months while we struggle to replace losses from experienced units. Within 6 months, American carrier groups will operate with complete air superiority. Within 12 months, they'll begin unrestricted bombing campaigns against Japanese home islands. His analysis drew on intelligence reports, but also on simple observation. American aircraft overhead grew more numerous weekly. B-24 Liberator bombers struck Rabaul in formations of 40 or 50 aircraft, escorted by dozens of fighters. Japanese interception attempts resulted in disproportionate casualties for every American bomber destroyed. Japan lost 3 or 4 fighters. The mathematics were unsustainable. In October, he received a letter from Keiko, his wife smuggled through irregular mail channels. She wrote carefully, knowing military censors might read her words. The neighborhood association is collecting metal for the war effort. I donated our tea ceremony set, the one your mother gave us. Everyone is making sacrifices. The radio speaks of great victories, but food grows scarcer. The children ask when you're returning home. I tell them when the war ends, but truthfully, I don't know when that might be. Takashita read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in his journal. Keiko had donated their tea ceremony set 200 years old, handed down through 5 generations, to be melted for munitions. Meanwhile, American factories produced more metal in a day than Japan could collect in a year. The image crystallized everything. Japan's war effort required civilians to sacrifice irreplaceable family heirlooms. While America's industrial base operated at a fraction of its total capacity, he wrote that night, this war was lost before it began. We attacked an opponent we could not defeat, whose industrial capacity we could not match, whose strategic depth we could not overcome. Future historians will ask why our leadership pursued such obvious catastrophe. I have no answer except institutional blindness and cultural hubris. February 21st, 1944. Takashita sat in his quarters recently relocated to a cave system after American bombing destroyed surface structures, and began what he knew would be his final journal entry. The American offensive through the Central Pacific was accelerating. Kwajalein had fallen. Eniwak was under assault. The Marshall Islands, promised as an impregnable barrier, had collapsed within weeks. American carrier groups now operated with virtual impunity, their combat air patrols destroying any Japanese aircraft attempting interception. His hands shook slightly as he opened his journal to a fresh page. Not from fear, he'd made peace with mortality months ago, but from exhaustion and malnutrition. Rabaul's garrison was slowly starving, supply convoys interdicted by American submarines and aircraft. Daily rations had been reduced to rice and whatever vegetables could be grown in improvised gardens. Takashita had lost 30 pounds since arriving at Rabaul, his uniform hanging loose on his frame. He wrote February 21st, 1944. This will be my final entry in this journal. Not because I expect to die tomorrow, though that remains possible with American raids intensifying, but because there is nothing left to document. The conclusion I predicted in December 1941 has arrived with mathematical precision. American industrial capacity has made Japanese victory impossible. This is not defeatism. This is recognition of observable reality. According to the last intelligence summary I received, American shipyards launched 16 fleet aircraft carriers in 1943. 16. Japan commissioned 0 fleet carriers last year. American factories produced 8,000 or 6,000 aircraft, while Japan produced approximately 16,000. American tank production exceeded 29,000 units, while Japan produced approximately 800. These figures describe not a war, but an industrial massacre. We are samurai facing machine guns, as I wrote months ago, but the metaphor understates the disparity. We are samurai facing an opponent with unlimited machine guns, unlimited ammunition, unlimited replacement personnel, and the industrial infrastructure to produce more of everything faster than we can destroy it. He paused, listening to distant explosions, American bombers striking Rabaul's remaining airfields. The raids came twice daily now, clockwork destruction that Japanese anti-aircraft defenses barely contested anymore. Most gun crews had exhausted their ammunition days ago. Why did we pursue this war? He continued writing. I have asked this question countless times. The answer lies in institutional failure to assess enemy capabilities objectively. Our military planners based strategy on assumptions that any objective analysis would have revealed as false. They assumed American industrial capacity was exaggerated. It was understated. They assumed American resolve was weak. It proved unbreakable. They assumed tactical brilliance could overcome material disadvantage. It cannot. The attack on Pearl Harbor, celebrated as a great victory, was our greatest strategic blunder. We attacked an opponent capable of producing aircraft faster than we could train pilots, ships faster than we could sink them, weapons faster than we could deploy them. Admiral Yamamoto said, "We awakened a sleeping giant." I believe we did worse. We awakened a giant we could never defeat, then gave that giant moral justification for our complete destruction. I write this not as military analysis, but as testimony for future historians. When they examine how Japan, a nation of intelligence and capability, pursued such catastrophic strategy, let this journal serve as evidence that some officers recognized the truth. We were ignored, dismissed as defeatists, transferred to remote outposts. But we were correct. The war will end with Japan's complete defeat. Whether that occurs in 1944, 1945, or later, depends only on how long our leadership refuses to acknowledge reality. Every additional month of fighting means more Japanese deaths for no strategic purpose. American bombers will soon reach Japanese home islands. The B-129 has the range and capability. Civilians will die by the thousands. Cities will burn. And none of this sacrifice will change the outcome determined by industrial capacity. To whoever reads this journal after my death, American industrial power made Japanese victory impossible from the moment we attacked Pearl Harbor. Everything that followed was an inevitable consequence of that mathematical reality. We could not win. We can only determine how much we lose before surrendering. Admiral Takashita closed his journal and wrapped it carefully in oiled cloth, protecting it from Rabal's tropical humidity. He placed it in a metal ammunition box, sealed with wax, and buried it beneath his quarters floor. He would survive the war, evacuated from Rabal in August 1944, repatriated to Japan, living until 1973, but the journal would remain hidden until 1989, when construction workers discovered the metal box during renovation of the old cave system. The journal was eventually donated to the National Institute for Defense Studies in Tokyo, where historians recognized its extraordinary value as first-hand testimony of a military officer who understood the war's inevitable outcome while it was still being fought. The final entry's assessment proved tragically accurate. American B-29s began bombing Japanese cities in 1944. By 1945, American submarines had destroyed Japan's merchant marine, starving the home islands of resources. The war ended in August 1945 after atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, weapons whose development was possible only because of the industrial capacity Takashita had warned about. Japan lost approximately 3 million people. The Admiral's mathematical certainty had become historical reality.